All of my life I've seen and experienced the paranormal. My earliest memories of seeing such things go back to when I was in preschool and have continued until recently. I'm 23 now, so it's been going on for a while. I had something dark attached to me until I was 20. It was really a terrifying experience, as whatever this thing was aggressive and followed me everywhere I went. I had been able to finally get rid of this with the help of a Wiccan friend of mine. It wasn't very long after this original thing had been removed before this experience happened. After the thing attached to me was removed, I began to notice something else following me, though it kept its distance. I would notice movement out of the corner of my eye, only for it to be gone every time I faced it directly, or I would see something pacing at the edges of light sources. I saw this just about everywhere I went, especially at night. I could tell by how this felt that it was not the dark spirit that had been with me once before, and because I had recently freed from it, I felt cocky and brazen. So one night, I went out of my room and went outside and called into the night for this thing, telling it I wasn't afraid of it and demanding it to stop lurking about and show itself. I don't know why I did this when I knew better, but I called it out. It didn't take very long for shit to hit the fan. Where I lived at the time was in the middle of nowhere in northern Idaho. There was a main house where my mom, stepdad, and 2 sisters lived, and then there was a shop where mine and my brother's rooms were. The shop was a good distance away from the main house, so if I needed anything, I would need to leave this shop and go outside and go up a hill to get to the house to get anything, whether it be food, water, or to use the restroom, as the bathroom built in the shop didn't even work. The layout of where I lived will come in later. So after I called this thing out, stuff started to happen. Something began hitting and pounding the walls outside my room. It moved around the building, not just staying to one side. This happened every night, right about at sunset. Then, late at night, I would hear something moving around in the shop. It sounded like someone was in there and moving things around, but there were never any signs of anyone having been in there when I would check in the morning, and the doors were locked, and no one but us had a key to the place. One night I was up late, scared shitless by everything going on at this point, when I got the feeling that I was being watched. I turned and looked at my window, and there was a face pressed against it, staring at me. It was completely white, and it almost looked like a mask with how still it was. It didn't have eyes. It just had 2 black pits on its otherwise white face with a blank expression. I screamed, and when I did, the face just disappeared. Not like something ducked away or ran. It was just like it was there 1 second, and then it was gone, like it had never been there to begin with. The next night I was up late, and I just wanted to go to the bathroom. I left my room and went to hurry up to the main house when I heard something come running up behind me. It sounded big and was breathing heavy, and I booked it to the main house with this thing chasing me the entire way. I had glanced over my shoulder when I first heard something, but there was nothing there, but I still heard something coming after me. I told my family about this, and they just sort of laughed it off, like I was making it up, even though most of my family had experienced something paranormal before. My stepdad was the worst with it, as he didn't believe in ghosts or anything of the like. He often made fun of me about the being chased up to the house part, saying I just heard myself breathing or something of the like, and often would mock me about the heavy breathing part. My stepdad, never once being a nice man, and even though he could tell I was terrified about what was going on, he continued to mock me about it. After a week of stuff going on, it just sort of stopped. I never saw or sensed the thing again, and nothing else involving it occurred. I guess it was simply showing me what it could do, and left once it decided I was sufficiently scared. And believe me, by the end of it I was. I learned my lesson from this, and have never called out spirits or anything else I saw again, and I haven't had anything else like this happen since. This takes place between the years of 1993 and 2001, and actually continues on. A little backstory to paint a more complete picture. I was raised Judo-Christian, and the paranormal was a touchy subject. The main point my father drilled into my head was, do not talk to ghosts. There is no absolute way of knowing their true intentions. My childhood home, the house my great-grandparents once lived in, and now myself at 6 years old, was a 1930s farmhouse set in southwest New Jersey on 10 acres of property. I remember being excited about living on a farm. No more moving. My dad had just retired from the military, and the opportunity to make real friends meant everything to me. But reality reared its ugly head, and what I thought would be a peaceful, stable existence turned into a nightmare. I could sense tension between my parents, and it in turn made me depressed. So much so I tried taking my life when I was 8. I didn't tell my parents the whole story why I was so sad. It wasn't just the late night arguments. It was the house. I heard people walking up and down the basement stairs. I saw and heard 2 men in the basement, where our television sitting room and desktop computers were. And there was what I thought was a little girl in my room. For several years, ages 6 through 13, 1993 through 2000, I saw this thing. Light shoulder-length hair, piercing eyes, white nightdress, and a bluish aura. We would talk and play in my room. Sometimes I could feel her outside when feeding the animals or walking through our large property. At first she was nice. Then she started saying dark things.
Your parents are done. No more family. You can be happy with me.
After the failed suicide attempt, I stopped talking to the thing in my room. I tried telling my parents about the activity in the later years, 8 through 13, but they brushed it off. They even took me to a psychologist, and I was part of a child study for a new drug for depression/ADD. I withdrew, starting to self-harm because no one would believe me, and my parents were dragging out a dead marriage. At 14, I snapped. Hard. My parents were having another epic late-night argument on a school night. When things finally quieted down around 3 a.m., I remember thinking that I can nap for now, feed the animals, sheep, goats, ducks, etc., real quick before the bus, sleep for 25 minutes till school, then go to the nurse and finally tell an adult I trusted what was going on, and maybe sleep through first period. My eyes started to close. My door was shut. Tigger and Chaz, my cats, could be heard eating their food and chasing something in the kitchen. Something sat on my bed. I had a full flotation waterbed. Basically, a fart will make the bed move. There was a visible and physical thing sitting in the left corner of my bed. I felt that feeling again. That thing was on my bed. I was so pissed. For years, I've been experiencing things that no one will believe. My parents were constantly at each other's throats. Now, with maybe the opportunity to get 3 hours of sleep, this thing decides to disrupt that? I screamed at the top of my lungs, "Get the fuck off my bed. Get the fuck away from me and just fuck off." My mom came running into my room, and I told her to let me be. That, "You never believed me in the past. Why would you believe me now?" That was the last time I experienced that pseudo-ghost girl. I still saw the guys in the basement, heard their whispers and footsteps, even saw an old lady in our sunroom, but no more bedroom haunts. After my parents divorced and my dad started dating, his girlfriend blessed my room. She was one of the few people who believed me. My dad believed that I believed it was real. He wasn't mean or dismissive. His religion just makes him weary of the supernatural and stories of experiences. Basically, if there's no proof, you can neither accept or deny the situation. Fast forward to the present day. I've moved out, got married, have a kid, and am living my life. About 6 months ago, my dad calls and starts asking questions about the girl. I told him it's not a girl, and then he drops a bombshell. "It happened to me, kiddo. She sat on my bed, but she was at the right corner of my bed, near my closet." "Dad, you realize its position is mirrored exactly. Did she point to the closet, which would be the far wall of your room?" "No, it never pointed at anything." My last experience was feeling its presence, that hungry sadness, and my pent-up rage and frustration. I told my dad to tell it to go away, call a rabbi for a blessing. He went to high school and is still friends with him anyway. My father is stubborn and hasn't done anything about it. If he is still experiencing whatever that thing is, he won't share. I don't know what to think about the situation, why the positions were mirrored, why it decided to lay dormant for almost 14 years, or why it was pointing to my room where it once sat all those years ago. I was 20 years old and just had my second child. My family and I had just moved into a house on a property which had another house on it. It was fenced, and a perfect place for children to roam. Or so I thought. The other house, which was 2 stories, was unoccupied. It was totally condemned. The owners of the property said it's been in the family for decades. It had burned down some years before. They never really wanted to reconstruct it. My sister had moved in with us due to a domestic violence situation. She told me one day that she was going to explore the ruins of the old house. I told her she was crazy, but my sister was adventurous, despite all the bad things she had endured. She took off out the door and started towards the house. It was probably hours until she came back with baby blankets and an old baby cradle still intact. I told her those weren't ours, and we could get in trouble for stealing them. She shrugged it off and said lightly, "What they don't know won't hurt them. And besides, I thought my little nephew could use them." I looked at her puzzled, but there was no convincing her of anything, so I just let it go. Later that night, I was residing in the living room on the sofa watching TV. The cradle was between the kitchen and our living room. I planned to clean it up the following morning. I noticed from my side vision that the cradle began to rock gently and slowly. I shrugged it off as a gust of wind, so I went back to watching TV. Then I thought I heard a baby cry. I checked on my baby, and he was fast asleep. I began to get very alarmed at that moment. My sister had washed the blankets she had found in the house. My son was wrapped in them. I began to assume the items were possessed or something. Then I thought I was going nuts. I went back to watching TV, and eventually went to sleep. I awoke to my cell phone ringing. The time said 3 or 4 a.m. I really can't remember. I answered it. I got no response. It was just a heavy breathing. Then it hung up. Okay. At this point I am freaked the hell out, and didn't sleep the remainder of the night. Morning came, and I told my sister to put all the things back where she had found them. She started laughing, and said that I was watching too many scary movies. She asked me when my oldest daughter, Tina, got home. I looked at her puzzled. She's spending the weekend at her father's. My sister looked panicked. She said frighteningly, "I saw a little girl up in Tina's room last night waving at me. I had my door open. I assumed." Then she stopped dead in her sentence and pointed behind me shakingly. The cradle began to rock again slowly, then faster and faster. Then I had my mom come over to help me watch my baby. We got all of the stuff out of the house and began to place the items back in the condemned house. I asked my sister how she got in there. She explained that there was a broken window on the bottom story, so we went through it. The house smelled like mold and mildew, furniture covered with plastic garbage bags, and debris everywhere. There was a staircase leading to the other story. My sister told me she found the items upstairs in an old-fashioned nursery. And as we all began to make our way upstairs, we heard a child laugh. We paused for a moment. We were only halfway up the stairs when we saw a little girl about the same age as my daughter, She wore a brown dress with black shoes, pigtails, and a beautiful little nose. She was holding something wrapped in a blanket. Then she disappeared in what seemed like seconds. We went into the room, placed the objects in there, and began to head out. Then we thought we smelled smoke. My sister said, "Do you smell that? It smells like a 4th of July barbecue." I began to panic, and so did my sister, so we ran fast out of there. As we were running, I looked back to see the girl peeking out the second-story window, waving goodbye. I felt so bad for her, like I wanted to adopt her or help her. We moved shortly after that. We looked into the history of the house and the property. It turns out that in 1939, the house had been burned down due to a fireplace being left unattended. A family with 2 small children, a girl and an infant, were killed in the fire. I was a little girl, maybe 4 or 5 when this happened. This is a story about my uncle and dad, but also about my family in general. My mom's side of the family is very close, and we spend all holidays and birthdays together with my cousins, aunts, and uncles. My dad and my Uncle Tim were good friends and often watched sports together. One weekend, my dad decided to go to my uncle's house to watch some football. For a little backstory, my uncle's oldest daughter was going through a messy divorce, and her soon-to-be ex-husband, Dave, was known to be a little dark and crazy. He also didn't like my Uncle Tim, as he's a bit hard to impress, and rude at times. My dad and uncle were watching the football game in my uncle's living room, when out of the front window, they noticed Crazy Dave's car pull up in front of the house. Dave has no reason to come over, and they know that this isn't good. My uncle heads towards the front door, most likely expecting a confrontation, but when he gets a closer look at Dave, he notices Dave is holding a bat. Dave runs towards the door, attempting to break it down with each swing of the bat. He is unsuccessful. He then decides to go to each window of the ground level of the house, smashing all of them one by one. By the time the front living room window is shattered, my uncle yells to my dad to run, as glass smashes all over them both. They haul ass down to the basement. My uncle grabs the cordless phone before they do. Meanwhile, Dave continues to break the fence down, and then smashes the backyard sliding glass door. He enters my uncle's home. My dad and uncle huddle silently in the basement closet, as Tim calls 911. They hear Dave's footsteps, and then the kitchen being destroyed overhead. They hear Dave opening every door, yelling profanities and death promises as he searches for them. Next, my dad and uncle hear Dave enter the garage, as he bashes in both of my dad and uncle's car's windows. Just then, they heard more footsteps, Dave running out of the house and into the front yard, then yelling, "It was the police." Dave had heard the cop cars pull up, and instead of trying to run, he had decided to try to confront them. He charged at the officers, baseball bat in hand. The police immediately tased him. In Dave's car, they found rope, duct tape, and a gun. I'm not sure if Dave was on something, or if he was just so crazy that he didn't care. I think that because he hated my uncle so much, he wanted to scare and then cause him pain, rather than just using the gun. Either way, he served 2 years in prison. This was the craziest thing that I can think of that has happened to a family member. But what's even creepier is that my 6-year-old cousin was supposed to have his birthday party at the house that day, but last minute, his mom decided to change the date. Dave knew when my cousin's birthday party was supposed to be. He knew that we all came to these family birthdays. He planned for all the uncles, aunts, and even little kids to be around when he came for revenge. Our family has never since heard from Dave, but some of my relatives have seen him in public, and all avoid contact. This happened when I was 11 years old, and my friend Casey was sleeping over at my house. One thing to note is that I have sleep apnea, which will usually be a bother to anybody who is sleeping over, but Casey was a very heavy sleeper. I doubt a bomb could even wake her up. At around 11 p.m., we both decided to call it a night. Another thing to note is that I have a futon leaning against my bed, so one side is against the wall and the other has a futon on it. Anyway, I remember not knowing what time it was, so I used my hand to scan the floor for my phone. When I found it, I turned it on, but the screen was so bright that I had to turn it away from my face. The light on my phone illuminated the room, and with that, I saw a tall, skinny woman in her late 50s with long white hair, leaning over the bed and looking at Casey. I, of course, screamed, and the woman ran. The way my house works is that my mom's room is right next to the stairs, and you had to go through my brother's room to get to the stairs. When my brother hears me screaming bloody murder, he immediately awoke to see the woman running out of my room. My mom opened her door, and my dog came rushing in front of her to attack the intruder. My dog isn't a German Shepherd or any kind of attack dog. He is a yellow lab, but if it comes to it, he will defend us with his life. He bit the woman's ankle, and my brother pinned her down while my mom and I called the police. I woke Casey up, but we didn't leave the room. When the police finally arrived, they took her away. Later, we found out that she had a serious case of dementia. I felt bad, but at the same time, I can't describe in text or words how afraid I was for my life and Casey's life. A few days later, I was cleaning my room, and when I was moving the bed to clean under it, I found multiple food wrappers and juice boxes. The story I'm about to tell is something that happened over the course of a few years, and I can't confirm that it even stopped happening. I live in Langley, a town near Vancouver. Half of Langley has the lowest crime in the lower mainland, while the other half has one of the highest crime rates. I live in the low crime rate end, but my brother lives in the high crime rate end. I'm a pretty lanky kid, who's a lot shorter than my brother, and my brother is pretty muscly and tall. This all started a few years ago, when my brother moved into the bad side of town. I didn't move with him, but sometimes I would visit. One weekend he introduced me to one of his new friends, Jonathan. Jonathan was a bit weird, but we had some fun. Jonathan had a few friends of his own that he would bring over, and they were fun too. Though, after a while they started to get really weird. For example, Jonathan stopped using the bathroom and would just let loose a log while he was wrestling on the trampoline. Shit particles would be everywhere. It was so unavoidable that I just stopped hanging out with them. They were so fucking disgusting. Every week they would beg me to hang out with them, and I would just say I'm busy or that I was going to make something to eat to avoid the situation. This went on for a little while, and by a little while, I mean about a year. After that year passed, Jonathan moved out, and we never heard anything from him again. This was a big relief to all of us, because he actually started to do really messed up shit, like watch my mom get changed, or worse. There were times he would bang on the window when I'm taking a piss and scare the shit out of me. Sometimes he would just straight up terrify me, as I saw his face staring at me through the living room window when I was trying to sleep on the couch. So it was pretty grand that he moved. A few weeks went by, and it felt like he was never there in the first place. But after those weeks, his friends started coming back, and my brother became friends with them again. This upset me, because they would get into fights all the time, over the stupidest things, like Call of Duty or Left 4 Dead. Some weeks, I just wouldn't visit him because I had had enough. Some weeks I wouldn't visit him because his friends had had enough of me. For whatever reasons, I'm still not very sure. This went on for a year, and it was so fucking annoying because they would always get into fights. After that year passed, things really started to hit rock bottom. My brother got a new girlfriend named Lexi. She was fine, and I didn't have a problem. It's just that the level of drama got so intense that I decided to stop coming. Though some weeks I would still come by, being persuaded by my brother. Every time I came over, they would be fighting over new things. For example, someone cheating on someone, and more stupid things like that. A few weeks later, I went to my brother's house, and one of his friends actually tried to run us over with his car. We were crossing the street to get some junk food, and we didn't even know he was coming. We were okay, but we were startled, and we were on full-on adrenaline. We got what we wanted and sprinted back home. My mom got an earful that night. She didn't really care and told us to watch some TV or something, so we did. Every few minutes we would hear rustling in the bushes though, but no one broke in or looked through the windows, so we never figured out who it was. Fast forward 2 weeks. I'm walking home from school, and another guy with a car tries to run me over, but I move fast enough for him to drive past me. There was heavy traffic, so he didn't try to hit me again. The weird part about this is that there was no way he would have known where I lived, because my brother and I live in opposite parts of town. Fast forward about 3 months, and my mom makes a post on Facebook about something that happened to my brother. The post she made said that he hadn't come home for 2 days and that she was freaking out. A few hours later, she called my house telling me that he was found unconscious and robbed of everything with him and in an entirely different town. That freaked me out, but it got worse. When my brother and mom were sleeping in their house, people broke in and stole a bunch of expensive items, like my mom's new laptop and some of my brother's games. They tried their hardest to get their stuff back, but the police said they couldn't do anything, and they went about their lives. Last month, my brother witnessed a girl coming into his house and stealing someone's phone. The girl got away, but luckily, he knew who she was and knew how to get into her Facebook. For some reason I really don't know. He was able to open her messenger, and she was talking to some unknown guy on Facebook. She was trying to sell the phone to some drug dealer to get crack. So he called the police and told them where the deal was being made, and she was arrested for theft. After that, again, no word, so I'm guessing it's been fine. I'm only interested in bringing all of this up because of what happened last night when I was on my computer. I was just doing my usual scrolling through Facebook, liking the occasional good meme, and groaning over every "here comes that boy" meme. You know, the usual boring evening. No one was awake but me. I was getting too bored, so I started listening to some YouTube. I'm afraid of being alone, to an extent, but I got used to it, so I was not really afraid. It's about an hour later, and I have nothing to do, so I start scrolling over my social media again, trying to find a good laugh. Suddenly, I get this heart-wrenching feeling like I'm being watched. I look around, and there's no one there, and I'm on the second floor, so no one could just be looking through my window. And even though I'm in my living room, I'm far enough away from any window where anyone could see me. I conclude I'm just getting anxious, so I watch some DAW's games to chill the mood up a bit. When out of nowhere, this black figure appears in my peripheral vision. I thought that it was my grandfather for a second, but it just stood there. The feeling of being watched came back, and I was too afraid to look. Whoever it was ran into my kitchen at full speed. At this point I looked. I had to. The person then ran full pace down the stairs and outside. I was completely beside myself. A bunch of hints suddenly clicked in. For example, things I was sure that I placed in one spot would be in an entirely different spot when I went to go find them. Boxes would be on their side, and the vacuum cleaner was taken out of the closet. I knew that all of my brother's friends liked to mess with me, but I don't know if it was them. I really don't understand what they were doing, because nothing was stolen. It just seems kind of pointless to hide in someone's house just to move a few items around. I really hope they don't come back. I'm not looking forward to an encore. This happened to me about 25 years ago, and it is still as vivid to me today as it was 25 years ago. But let me give you some perspective beforehand. I'm 36 years old, have my bachelor's degree, was in the military, and am an atheist. So, there's very little room in my life for things that I do believe in, or things that I do not believe in. I am not the type of person who scares easily. Even growing up, I was never afraid of the dark or the boogeyman. I grew up in an extremely small town on the southwestern edge of Michigan, a tiny resort called South Haven. My family wasn't wealthy, but we weren't poor either. My dad made a good living as a general contractor. Being that he was in construction, I learned a lot about our house, even if I didn't want to. One of the things about our house that was very odd was that it only had one door to enter or exit, and one bathroom that happened to be right by our front door and across the hallway from my room. These are the key elements to this story. I was 10 or 11 at the time this happened. One night I wake up to the sound of someone walking down our hall. The footfalls sounded heavy, like it was most likely my dad. So without thinking about it twice, I rolled over and fell back asleep. When I wake the next morning, I'm waiting to use the bathroom when my brother comes out and tells me to make sure to flush the toilet after you use it during the night. Not sure what he meant. I tell him that I didn't use the bathroom last night. Dad did. But to mine and my brother's dismay, he tells us that he didn't use the bathroom at all last night. Well, with what I remember hearing and what was in the toilet, someone did use our bathroom. Over the course of the next few nights, there are several occurrences where the same thing happens. I am awoken to the sound of heavy footfalls, and there is always bright yellow pee in the toilet in the morning. However, the only thing that hasn't been connected yet is that the footsteps only go to the bathroom. I never hear anyone go in, or use the bathroom for that matter. After a solid month of this occurrence, I decide to try and figure it out. When I head to bed that night, I leave my door open just enough to let the light and shadows in. Just like clockwork, I woke up to heavy footsteps. The door is open enough for me to make out a form coming down the hallway. However, when it gets to my door, oddly enough, my door is pulled shut. I am completely scared shitless now. Someone or something just closed my door. I, just like any kid, throw the covers over my head and try to hide away from this fright. Now at this point, I tell my family what's been happening. My dad was raised in our house. The room I live in was the room of my grandma and grandpa. They both had been dead for years prior to these instances. My dad jokingly tells me that when he was a kid, he had the same thing happen to him as well. Being that my dad is a big joker, I didn't believe him, but he did say that he was never able to see anything. I told him what had happened with the closing of my door. He again said that he had never seen anything like that happen. I have a strange sense of fear/wonder. I almost feel like I need to try to see whatever this thing looks like. So I decide that the next time this happens, I'm gonna get out of bed, go to my door, open it, turn on the lights, which will illuminate the bathroom. Now, keep in mind, up until this point I have only ever seen a shadow or heard things. Besides the leftover pee, never anything else besides the shadow that closed my door. That night I lay awake for a while. Finally I fall asleep, only to be jolted awake by the sounds of those familiar footfalls. For some reason I have much more fear running through me. I could almost see my fear like lightning in the air. I throw my covers off as quietly as I can, sit up and swing my feet off my bed. I start to walk towards my door and light switch, when my door seems to be pulled shut. While that happens, I'm startled to hear the sound of pee in the toilet. Now, of course, Realizing that it's probably my dad pranking me the whole time, I don't bother to turn off my bedroom light. However, the second I put my hand on my bedroom door, the pee stops. I step into the hallway, only to see that the bathroom door is closed and the light is off. I figure it's all or nothing at this point. I rush into the bathroom to find a very odd scene. The toilet is filled with yellow pee, and there are 2 distinct footprints remaining in the carpet in front of the toilet. I guess carpet in the bathroom was a Midwest thing, but without it I wouldn't have had anything besides the pee to show anyone. I run to my parents' room and get my dad. I tell him what happened, and he tells me that I was probably sleepwalking and dreaming while I was doing it, and peed in the toilet myself. After this incident, there were 2 other times where the same thing happened. The very last time it happened was the most odd. All of the same things happened. The foot falls, pulls my door shut, but when I make it into the bathroom, the water in the sink was on, and from the mist of hot water, there was a strange fog on the mirror, but there was a handprint on it. After that, I made my brother switch me rooms. My name is Michael, and a few months ago I was spending the night at my friend Trevor's house. He is not really an outdoorsy kind of guy, but I had convinced him to walk through a huge field next to his house and into the woods to explore. I should probably tell you about us before I continue. I was 15 at the time, 195 pounds, and 5'4". Not really muscular, more on the fat side. Trevor is the opposite. About 6'3", maybe 160 pounds, like a twig. Anyways, we were walking up through the woods, and we found a trail at the top of the hill, more like a steep slope. We decided to follow it for a while, about 20 minutes or so, when it started getting dark outside. I only had an iPod 4 at the time, and his phone was on a low battery, so when we decided to head home, we had to turn the flashlight on his phone on and off. It took us a while, but we finally made it to the bottom of the hill, when we see that we had went the wrong way. We came out on the highway, next to a State Farm building. He told me he knew where we were, and said to follow him down the road, which I did. About 10 minutes later we turned left, onto a thin road going through some thick woods, with only about 3 or 4 houses spaced out. He told me that there was a kidnapping somewhere on this street, and that back when his mother was our age, there was a rapist who lived in one of these houses. We were both really tired, because we had been walking for nearly 2 hours down this skinny street, when he turned and pointed to the supposed rapist's house. It looked more like a shack, with a cracked roof, overgrown grass, that sort of stuff. We were being quiet walking past it, when all of a sudden some dogs started barking and growling. I'm pretty sure at us. We started to pick up pace, when we heard a door open and slam shut, and then some old-sounding man yelling, "Come out, kids, I know you're here." With that, we bolted in the other direction, back the wrong way. Once we had caught our breath, we decided to pass the house through the woods. It seemed like a good idea, but definitely wasn't. A little ways past the house, we heard leaves crunching behind us, and then growling. It was the man, who seemed to be in his late 50s, if I had to guess. He had followed us and brought his dogs with him. At this point, I was cursing at myself in my head for being so dumb, and Trevor was murmuring some nonsensical words. Without warning, the man had let go of his dogs, and we ran through the woods, with those damn dogs at our heels. One of them ripped my jacket, and I tripped, but got back up. Eventually, we started to see his neighborhood to the right, and we swerved out of the woods and jumped over some fences and into someone's backyard. The dog bit Trevor's leg, but we got away. They were going crazy on the other side, but the man was nowhere to be seen. I guess he couldn't keep up with how old he was. We waited for what seemed like an hour before they ran off after something. We sat there for maybe 5 more minutes before hopping back over the fence and running to his house. We got inside and locked the doors, which freaked his mom out. We told her what happened to us, and she, surprisingly, wasn't mad. She sort of chuckled and told us how happy she was that we were okay. Well, other than the dog bite on Trevor's leg, which wasn't bad. She said she wanted to call the cops, but we convinced her not to. We were way too afraid and just wanted to not think about it. We haven't gone back into the woods anymore for fear of getting lost again. I'm really glad we got away from that guy. It was frightening just thinking about what might have happened to us. I'm a reenactor by hobby and am part of a group. As well as public events, we sometimes get together for private training days. We cover stuff like weapons and tactics used during World War II, amongst other things. One site we used was a National Trust site, Spring Hill House. The property covers many acres, and at the far back of the site, there is a foundation that belongs to Nissan huts that were used to house the 505th PIR 82nd Airborne during the war. Although most of it is overgrown now and heavily wooded, there is a trail that loops round from the back of the house and brings you back almost to the same point. At this site, we usually had our event over the weekend, which meant spending the Saturday night in a barn that we were allowed to stay in. We loved it, as that means a bit of crack in the morning. It also gives us the opportunity to conduct night ops when it becomes dark, which we did on this night. On the Saturday, 6 group members showed up, with the rest showing up Sunday. Nighttime came, and so did the time for the night ops. Since there were so few of us, we decided that 2 of the German reenactors would be out on patrol, with the 4 allies leaving in 2 groups of 2, a few minutes apart, in hopes to engage the enemy. Myself and my friend, Tom, were patrolling the trail round back to the house, listening for any movement other than our own. It was completely silent, as we were miles away from the nearest town. We reached the farthest point from the house. Suddenly we hear the rustling of leaves and snapping of twigs to our right. We dropped to our knees and took cover behind a tree, as soldiers do, and gave our allies a call sign. There is no response. We give the all-section call sign. No response. The noise was a little way off the trail in the scrub. There was a gap in the trees big enough to let the moonlight through. I could see we were facing where the once overgrown Nissan huts once stood. The noise was coming from behind them. I could just make out a tall, thin, black shadow figure moving between the trees. I'm sure it wasn't a human, as it moved from left to right for a short distance, and then seemed to repeat this. I watched this figure do this 3 times before Tom turned to me and whispered, "Do you see that?" "Yeah," I replied. "Let's get out of here." We hurried it back to the lights of the barn, where we found the 4 other members had returned due to the 12 a.m. finish time for the exercise. We were slightly freaked out, but it didn't really bother us. In fact, we weren't even sure what we had seen. It wasn't until one of the guys playing the Germans said that he had seen something similar in the same place that night too. I was glad to have 2 other people that had seen it, as it confirms that there was something there. Although, I'm still not entirely sure what. I have often wondered why the figure repeated the same action, again and again. As I said, the figure walked from left to right a few steps, then walked from left to right again. It wasn't a line of people, otherwise we would have heard them and seen them. Only 3 of my group ventured that far, including me, and we didn't stray off the trail. And the figure didn't venture past the 2 trees I was using as markers whilst watching its movements. I couldn't work it out, until I came across an article about the stone tape theory. The stone tape theory is the speculation that ghosts and hauntings are analogous to tape recordings, and that electrical mental impressions released during emotional and traumatic events can somehow be stored in moist rocks and other items, and replayed under certain conditions. I was visiting my half-brother and his family in Harlan, Kentucky. The kind of place you don't find on a map. Typical Deep South good old boys. They had a huge property. In front there were non-operating train tracks that, when followed, went to this old basketball court/shooting range area. Both sides of the tracks to get there had thick brush, barbed wire fence like a max security prison, and a 30-foot deadly rocky drop on either side. Meaning when you walk the tracks, you were safe and can't fall, unless you cut your body in half to get through the sharp fence and brush. I was 22 at the time, and just got my new Glock 26 handgun, and my 14-year-old cousin was begging to go down to the tracks and shoot it. It was 4 p.m. and winter, so it got dark at around 6:30 p.m., and the track walk to the basketball area that we made into a hillbilly gun range was only a quarter-mile walk, if that. I had 200 9mm rounds, so I figured that would do, beside the 10-round hollow point magazine I kept for defense. We went down the tracks. Keep in mind this was our private property, and the neighbors were family on both sides of the tracks, so we had the area to us and family without any worries. After 200 rounds were fired off, it was already almost dark. The walk back at night sucked, because there was only one light on the tracks to show the halfway point from the range to the house that my half-brother's dad installed. As we were walking, we saw a dark shadow sitting on the tracks, which was not normal. It was a man with a cowboy hat on and what seemed to be a long coat. We couldn't see his face. I asked him if he was okay, but he just stayed still. I told him he was on private property and needed to leave. Nothing. Again, I told him he needed to leave. He was frozen like a statue. I pulled my gun, which already had my hollow point magazine in it, and pointed at him, yelling, "Get the fuck up now!" I noticed my cousin took off running after an odd scream he let out, for no reason other than a possible shootout. But for some reason, I took off running too, only to glance back and see nothing. What the fuck? You can't jump, as I said, and even if he tried I would have heard it, and it would take 20 minutes to get through the razor wires. We ran home and told my cousin's dad what happened. He laughed with an odd look, told my cousin to relax and not to worry. He called me into the next room and said, "I saw him once too," and then brought me into his office area, opening a door saying, "Read this." It was a newspaper article, dated 1950 or something, during the coal mining wars of Harlan, Kentucky. Just search for the book called Bloody Harlan. Yup, my half-brother's family's in it. Anyway, the article said, "Man commits suicide on train tracks, but assumed murder." The photo was of the same man that I almost shot. If you enjoyed this video, you know what to do. If you would like a chance to have your story featured in an upcoming video, make sure you email it to urmaker6260@gmail.com. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I really appreciate you watching, and I'll catch you in the next video. And don't forget to watch your back, because you never know who or what is watching you.